sure this is the right entrance?
I used to work here, remember? Yeah, I'm sure.
Igor, take a rad reading, will you?
Uh, 3.6. Not great. Not terrible. Chin up. We're safe for another hour or so, all right?
None of you are safe.
What does the dosimeter say?
3.6 Röntgen, but that's as high as the meter.
3.6. Not great, not terrible.
I've known about Chernobylite for a while now. I mean, I knew that it was in early access. In the last few months I had completely forgotten about its existence and was all the more surprised when I saw it finally arrive as a finished product. These kinds of games, which require you to traverse the irradiated wasteland, encounter anomalies and mutants, they really appeal to me. That's why I'm also such a huge fan of Fallout and Metro. So naturally, I ignored all other games on my agenda in favor of becoming a stalker once more and exploring the somewhat familiar Pripyat and its surroundings. I was pleasantly surprised to see that Chernobylite supports ultra-wide resolutions natively and even has a separate field of view slider, which ensures that I would be able to enjoy the game's visuals properly without having to bother looking for fixes. The game also has an HDR function, but to be quite honest, I was not impressed with how it looks with it, so if you don't have a monitor that supports HDR, trust me, you're not missing much here. You can actually choose if you would rather have the characters speak in original Russian or English. Since these kinds of games often feature conversations during gameplay, I decided to go with the English voice acting because I did not want to be distracted by the subtitles, and I don't really speak Russian, so I can't really work with that. Considering that this is an indie title, I was surprised to even see such an option to begin with. For the most part, the English dub is pretty bad. Most voices don't seem to fit characters, starting with our protagonist. I mean, you look at his picture and then you hear the voice and it just feels like there's a huge discrepancy between the age of the guy in the picture and the age of the guy speaking. And on my second playthrough, I actually did start playing the game with Russian voices, and surprisingly, the Russian voice, while being really good, doesn't seem to fit the character in particular as well. On the other end, there are a few really good voice actors in the English dub, one of them being Olga, a woman we encounter a lot later in the game. Her voice actress is actually quite famous and I've heard her in other games. So the English dub is a bit of a mixed bag, but absolutely acceptable, and all things considered, I think they really did make the most of what they had, especially considering the limited funds they were working with. The same cannot be said about the written text that you encounter in the game. There were quite a few errors that I managed to find, and the fact that I've noticed it so much means that they were often enough for me to do so. I'm just surprised how this happens with a game that's been in early access for so long and which has had a lot of players, many of which native speakers. I wonder if they didn't give any feedback, or if the developer just didn't care enough to proofread the stuff or listen to the feedback they got. Regardless, this is not that big of a problem, but it is a minor annoyance. The game introduces us to the gameplay with a short tutorial section at the start. Here we learn that stealth is going to be an important part of Chernobylite. As someone who loves playing stealthily, I have some serious criticism when it comes to that. But before I can address these problems, I have to address several other mechanics first. For starters, our character has a health bar, an armor bar, and a sanity bar. The health bar is self-explanatory. You get hit, you lose some of your health and need to heal. The armor bar tells you how much armor you currently have. The sanity bar drains mostly as you kill people. A few other things can cause it to drain as well, but murder is the main reason. I never really found that to be an issue because healing it with a bottle of vodka or some soup was easy to do. And you can be sure that finding a bottle of vodka is not a challenging thing to do in Ukraine. I think the idea of the sanity bar is pretty good, especially considering the fact that our protagonist is a scientist, not some kind of a badass soldier who was trained to kill. The game's story revolves around our protagonist's desire to enter the power plant because his wife disappeared years ago and he suspects she might be there. His first attempt fails due to the interference of a special enemy known only as the Black Stalker. He kills one of your companions while you and the other one barely manage to escape with your lives. This makes it obvious to you that a larger crew and a more carefully prepared plan will be needed. So now your task is to find new allies and prepare the heist. Each new ally comes with their own set of skills, and the best part is that you can learn from them. You have an experience bar, and as you level up, you unlock skill points. These points can then be invested in skills which will be taught to you by the companions themselves. The game actually goes so far that you always get a short training mission where the specific character teaches you the skill of your choosing. At first I found it very original and interesting, but as time passed, these mini missions just felt like a waste of my time and began to annoy me. So now back to the stealth. One of the skills you can learn is the non-lethal takedown. The point of this approach is that our character is now not losing sanity whenever performing a takedown. Before that, you would stab people, they would die, and you'd lose a little bit of sanity because after all, you murdered a guy. But now, since the victim is only incapacitated, but not really dead, you don't get to lose anymore. My problem here is that this takedown is either just as slow as the lethal one, or in fact even slower. Personally, whenever I play such games, I'd rather just kill the opponents if the advantage of a non-lethal takedown is so minor. But once you get that skill in this case, you cannot perform lethal takedowns anymore. It's permanent and overrides your initial one. And not only is this newer version of the takedown either just as slow or even slower, I really haven't timed it, but it feels a bit slower, but you can't even look around while choking out your victim. And it will almost always result in some other enemy seeing you from somewhere. It feels almost like the game intentionally does this. This is my main issue with this game's stealth. I played on normal difficulty and it felt like the point of stealth was avoiding combat by sneaking around and not actually neutralizing enemies. Even if you feel certain that in this particular situation, nobody should be able to see you while you choke out a guy, someone still does somehow, and then all hell breaks loose, since now the soldiers are alerted and will always know where you are for some reason, even if you're hiding. Your option is to run away and wait for 2 literal minutes, or engage them and get it over with. And since we are on the topic of stealth, some armored enemies cannot be dispatched quietly, and neither can the mutants. The problem is that the game doesn't tell you this. The only way for you to find out is to sneak behind one of them and see that there is no prompt for a takedown. At first I assumed that I might get these options when I upgraded later on, but sadly that was not the case. So stealth is unfortunately not as good as it could have been. And since I've addressed the gunfights, it's time to talk about the weapons and their upgrades. You will only find a few types of weapons and each has a small number of upgrades available, which will make them a little bit better. Strangely enough, most weapons have a suppressor upgrade, which doesn't really make the weapon silent enough for it to be used stealthily. The enemies can still hear you shoot with it, so I'm not really convinced that there's any point to it to begin with. The guns work well enough and the shooting feels a lot like the one from Fallout 4, which is a good thing in my book. All in all, the combat in the game won't impress you with anything, but is absolutely okay and will still offer some flexibility thanks to the upgrades and the differences between the actual weapons. Now let's talk exploration. The game's happenings are all divided by days. Your character wakes up and gets to do a mission while sending his companions out to do some tasks of their own. Each mission takes part in one of the several game maps. I didn't count them, but I'd say there are at least 6 or 7 of them, and while not awfully large, they do feel different and interesting enough. You will always have a main quest, but also several points of interest which will involve encounters with NPCs who might sell you things, some minor anomalies such as this talking doll.
I must be tired. This doll isn't really talking, is it?
You're making a big mistake. Why did you come here? Watch out for him. He can do you serious harm. You will only find pain here.
No, no fucking way I'm abandoning Tatiana now.
He is coming, Igor. He's close.
And other similar things. The problem here is that most of these encounters are concentrated at the beginning of the game. The first time, when you explore each map, you end up finding a lot of weird stuff. But later on, it's as though the devs had exhausted all of their ideas. This goes so far that the last missions are also the only things you can do on the map, since you have already discovered everything else, including the secrets. I mean, if you have to recycle the maps, at least give me something more to do. And speaking of map recycling, let's talk enemies. There are only a few types of them and no bosses if we don't count the one at the end of the game. The maps look beautiful and are very atmospheric, but simultaneously a bit artificial. There are no birds, no insects, no animals in general. In one of the training sections, when I was leveling up a skill, the particular companion who was training me asked me to hunt some rabbits. I was surprised and thought that perhaps there are rabbits all over the map and I had just missed them for some reason. So I went back in another mission, in a standard mission which takes place on one of the maps, and yeah, there are no rabbits. There are no animals whatsoever, so these rabbits are just for this one section where you get trained. I would have loved some mutated animals as well, or even insects. For example, like in Fallout 4 or Fallout 3 or any of the Fallout games really. The thing is, traversing these maps feels really safe for the most part. The areas will change dynamically from time to time, either becoming more radioactive or having more soldiers, etc. based on the things you have done before. But these changes still feel rather minor. And if that is annoying you, there's always the option to build special devices which will counter these things so that next time there will be less of whatever annoyance is bothering you. For example, you don't like radiation, you build this special construction, and next time you have a mission on this particular map, there will be a lot less radiation to begin with. I find it strange that there weren't a few cases where the game would force you to do missions during the night. This would have made it a lot more menacing. It would have even been cool if the game lets you choose if you want to do each mission during the night or during the day. And let's say if you go out when it's dark, there would be new, stronger enemies, but then also better rewards. So kind of a high risk, high reward option for each mission. Instead, for the most part, our character returns to the warehouse each evening and will perform the next mission on the next day after he has slept. Finally, let's talk about the exploration aspect of things. I did mention it a bit in the past, but I want to delve deeper now. The game's maps are full with various materials which you need to collect in order to be able to craft things and expand your base. You use a special device to scan for items in the vicinity, and it's really satisfying to walk around and loot the whole map. Since the enemies don't respawn as well, you can clear the whole area first and then loot all of it. Trust me, it's quite satisfying and relaxing. My only gripe is that sometimes items will require you to approach them at a specific angle so that you can actually loot them. On a very rare occasion, the prompt to loot the item never appeared no matter what I did, so I just gave up after a few tries, which felt very frustrating by the way. This is where I have to mention two bugs. First, I got stuck in a place that looked very welcoming before I entered it. There was no way of going out. Luckily, the game autosaves you constantly, and I had only lost the equivalent of about 2 minutes of gameplay. In another instance, and this is a funny one, I had killed 2 soldiers from afar. Later, when I approached the place where they had stood while still alive, a conversation between the 2 of them started playing. This bug occurred several times, and to be honest, I view it as a positive thing, since I would have missed some of the interesting discussions between the soldiers if it had not happened. Here's an example of it.
Everyone thought he was just some nutty professor. He blindsided us all.
Egghead's figured out how to disable the technology he uses to make jumps.
Something that surprised me was that if you load a game during a mission, all enemies will have respawned for some reason. Once I literally appeared while surrounded by enemy soldiers and barely made it out alive. Last but not least, I want to mention how the game managed to scare me. Chernobylite will attempt jump scares, but for the most part they're so obvious and non-intrusive that the player will see them coming and will not be impressed. Not to mention that they are very rare. For the most part, like I said. But I did find myself exploring the wasteland, thinking it's a very relaxing experience, and then this happened. I swear this was one of the few times in my life when a game actually managed to make me scream from a jump scare. I'm so lucky that my wife didn't hear it, because she would have made fun of me for days. Chernobylite is not a scary game, yet it managed to scare me better than 90% of all horror games that I have played. That's a pretty impressive achievement. Once the mission is complete, you get to go back to your base and see how your companions handled their tasks. You pick how much each of them gets to eat and can then spend the rest of the evening building things inside your base in a manner which reminds me yet again of Fallout 4. Personally, I was never a fan of the base building there, so it was not my favorite thing to do here either. The good thing is that your companions all have lots of stories which they will happily share with you after each mission. Not all of them are that good, but it's worth listening to each one. And speaking of the companions, there is a lot they could have done better here as well. First of all, I wish I could send some of them out on missions which would take place in the same area as mine. Perhaps they could get in trouble and I'd have to help them, or they would die. That would be something cool. And while the game lets you develop relationships with them, these are solely based on your decisions in some of the missions. There's no other way to do anything relationship wise. Why not make it so that when they share their stories with me, we become closer and develop deeper relationships? Maybe my character could have a sexual relationship with Olga, which will then cause him to question his morals, since he's supposed to be looking for his wife while basically cheating on her. There are many ways in which the game could have made the companions more interesting. Instead, the only way their relationship with me changes is, again, through the decisions I choose to make at the end of some of the main missions. Many of them place the player before two options, and usually some companion asks you to choose one solution while another disagrees and considers the second option to be the better one. Obviously, there's no way to make everyone happy, so you have to make a choice and live with the consequences of it. In my case, I made the choices based on the goal at hand. Whatever helps me get to my wife faster, in the game obviously, was the thing that I would do. My companions rarely influenced my decision, although in some cases they did it a bit, because some of these choices are a lot more obvious than others. Should you disregard the desires of someone too much, there's a very real chance that they will simply leave. This is bad because you need all of them for the final mission. In addition to all of that, you also collect clues regarding your wife's disappearance. Once you have enough of them, you can use a VR headset with special software in it, which helps you recreate events of the past based on that evidence. This is where my main criticism comes into play. Whether you can or cannot do an investigation will strongly depend on how dedicated you are when it comes to exploring the maps. I was extremely thorough in my exploration from the moment I started the game, and I managed to find a lot of the hidden files in a relatively short amount of time. The investigations revealed some pretty important information about some of the story-related characters. However, it would seem as though the game does not keep track of that. My protagonist would simply act as though he doesn't know any of the things he had learned during the investigations. For example, he would sometimes say something like, "So that's what happened, now I know what to do," while he is doing the investigation. And then the next day, he would go on a main mission and act as though that investigation never happened. This issue could have been solved easily by making it so the software needs a few days to make the simulation based on all of the evidence. Then the game could simply not allow you to view it until you have progressed far enough through the main story so that you can then see these things, learn this information, and your character would act upon it. Instead, we learn things and then our character simply ignores them, as though we never did. The final mechanic which I want to address is death. In this game, dying is part of the plan. You get to make choices, and there is only one correct path to reaching the desired goal. Our character travels through time and space, and dying is a way for us to change some of our choices of the past. The game actually teaches you about this very early on. You're not supposed to be perfect. It's all kind of a trial and error thing, and if you don't do things right, things will go bad at some point, and then it's time for you to die and change the outcome. I would like to tell you more, but that would be dangerously close to the spoiler zone, so I will leave the rest to those of you who wish to play through the game. Beating Chernobylite for the first time took me around 24 hours, and despite the many criticisms I have towards it, it was still a very enjoyable experience. So enjoyable in fact that I have started a second playthrough now with the Russian voices, where I'll try to go through the game again. There's a lot of room for improvement here, but given that this is the first game developed by this team, I have to say that I am impressed. They were really ambitious, and you can tell that a lot of work and love went into this project. The game's currently sold for $30, and I think this is a very good price for what you get in return. Chernobylite is without a doubt a hidden gem, and can be enjoyed by both those who crave more adventures in a nuclear wasteland, as well as players who just like RPG shooter games with a bit of sci-fi mixed in. So if you ask me, you should definitely give this one a chance, and hopefully the developer will keep up the good work and deliver us an even greater game next time. With that having been said, I want to thank you for watching Game Filter. Hopefully this review was entertaining and informative to you, and don't be afraid to leave me a comment. Have you played the game? Do you agree with my criticism, or was I too picky? Let me know. Trust me, I can take criticism almost as well as praise. In any case, I hope to see you on the next one. Until then, have a great day.